What if I told you that Spain was ruled by a king who simply never got out of bed? Not because of paralysis. Not because of injury. But because he sincerely believed that his body was decaying and he was already dead. This monarch was Philip V, grandson of Louis XIV, the Sun King himself. He was the man who was expected to restore greatness, a symbol of a new beginning after the exhausting War of the Spanish Succession. He ruled an empire that stretched from the New World to the Philippines. And what did Spain get? A king who lay under a blanket for weeks, refused to be cared for, and forbade anyone from cleaning his bedroom. Who called doctors and ordered them to check his condition because he was convinced that he was rotting alive. Imagine this scene: ministers enter a darkened room where the air is heavy and stuffy, and candles barely illuminate the king's figure. Documents with seals that decide the fate of the state are slipped under the blanket. Musicians perform arias by his bedside, not for entertainment, but to force the monarch to at least open his mouth and eat. This is not a legend. This is not a literary image. This is 18th century Spain. And this is the story of a king who turned his bedroom into a throne room and an entire empire into a theater of the absurd. But to understand how Spain came to such humiliation, we must go back several decades, to the childhood of this strange king. Versailles. A court shining with gold and mirrors, where even footsteps echo in the marble halls. At the heart of this splendor grows a boy with the blood of Europe's most powerful dynasty flowing through his veins. His grandfather is Louis XIV, the Sun King, before whom kings and popes trembled. Philippe is being prepared for the future from day one. He is not a child, but a symbol. His every move and every gesture are scrutinized. He must embody the greatness of France and the hope of Spain. The year is 1700. The last Habsburg, Charles II, dies, and the 17-year-old Philip V ascends to the Spanish throne. His arrival marks the beginning of the War of the Spanish Succession, which will last 14 years. But beneath the glittering facade lay something else. Even as a young man, he seemed overly sensitive. He prayed for hours, repeating the same words as if they were a spell. Any sinful thought caused him to panic. His religiosity resembled obsession rather than piety. Sometimes even stranger things happened. Imagine a hall full of courtiers. The prince is about to greet the guests, but suddenly stops. His body freezes, his gaze becomes empty. A minute, 2, 3. People are afraid to move. And only then does he slowly blink his eyes, as if returning from another world. To some, it looked like divine ecstasy. To others, it was a warning sign. There was something dark and unstable about this boy. Spain expected decisiveness and strength from him. Instead, his fragility became increasingly apparent. The shadow that covered his consciousness would turn into an abyss over the years. Because when he sits on the throne, his first words will be, "I am already dead." The Madrid Palace. Dawn. Ministers gathered in the corridors with important documents, orders for the army, letters to allies, decrees for the treasury. Everyone is waiting for the king to sign. They enter his bedroom. The curtains are closed, and fresh air hardly gets in. The candles are barely burning. And in this semi-darkness is the figure of the king. Philip lies wrapped in a blanket, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. "Your Majesty," says the Prime Minister, holding out a pen. "You must sign." The king slowly turns his head. His voice is quiet but confident. "I am already dead." Researchers later suggested that Philip may have had symptoms of Cotard syndrome, a rare mental condition in which a person is convinced that they are dead or empty inside. This is only a theory, but it helps explain his strange words, "I am dead" or "I am rotting." The servants freeze. The doctor tries to intervene. "No, Your Majesty, you are talking to us, you are alive." Philip turns away. The dead do not sign documents. The silence becomes unbearable. One of the ministers tries to joke, but the laughter sounds hollow and strange. From that day on, it became a ritual. Every time decrees were brought to him, the king refused, repeating the same thing, "I am already dead." Documents piled up, and the affairs of state came to a standstill. Doctors came up with tricks. They held a mirror to his face to show his breath, or placed his hand on the minister's hand to prove that he was warm. But Philip remained unmoved. "Inside me is emptiness." Imagine the absurdity: a vast empire, which owns the gold of America and colonies in Asia, is ruled by a man who is convinced that he is a corpse. And if today he still says something, tomorrow he may not even get out of bed. In 1724, something even stranger happened. Philip abdicated the throne in favor of his son Louis. But Louis remained king for only a few months and died at a very young age. 6 days passed, and Philip regained his crown. Thus, Spain got a monarch who tried to escape from power, but power would not let him go. His words about death were only a prologue. Then came the real darkness. Philip stopped getting out of bed. At first it was days, then weeks. The bedroom turned into a trap, a kind of tomb with velvet curtains. He refused to leave, refusing even basic personal care. His hair lost its neatness, his nails grew, and his appearance became frightening. The courtiers brought documents directly to his bedside, and the ministers held meetings at his bedside. He mechanically scribbled with a pen and immediately threw it away, looking through everyone as if they were ghosts. Officially, they said that the king was resting. But everyone knew that Spain was ruled by a bed. And then a new, even more alarming phrase was heard. "My body is rotting. I am rotting alive." One morning, he began to repeat a new phrase. "I am rotting. My body is decomposing." According to his contemporaries, he insisted that doctors check him. In practice, they held a mirror to his face, listened to his breathing and pulse. Sometimes he demanded more, to prove that there are already worms inside. It was his own formula for fear. The doctors objected, but he refused even to eat. "I can't, I'm already rotting." There was a heavy atmosphere in the chambers because the bed had not been changed for a long time. This only reinforced his conviction. For the court, it was a horror. Before them lay a monarch who considered himself dead. And Philip repeated, "I am among you, but I am no longer alive." His bedroom became a stage. The blanket became a throne. And Philip himself became the main prop, without which the life of the state could not move forward. Ministers quietly entered and slipped him decrees. Doctors took his hand and guided it to the pen. The signature appeared blurred, but with the seal, and thus the laws of Spain were passed. To get him to eat, musicians were brought in. Violins and choirs sang right by his bed to distract him from his gloomy thoughts. Sometimes the king would blink and swallow a piece of bread. 1737. Farinelli, a famous castrato singer, is invited to the court. His mission is to heal the king with songs. Every night he performed the same 4 arias, and so it continued for years. Without this concert, the king refused to eat or sign documents. While the courtiers performed at the bedside, the real director of this drama was one person. Elizabeth Farnese, the second wife of Philip V. In 1714, Philip married Elizabeth, and this event became a turning point for the Spanish court. It was she who would eventually take power when her husband finally succumbed to his illnesses. She entered the king's life when he was already psychologically broken. And it was she who gradually turned his bedroom into her office. Ministers who once bowed to the will of the monarch now waited only for her nod. If she agreed, a signature appeared under the document. If not, the decrees were lost in the silence of the blankets. Rumors circulated that Elizabeth kept her husband in a sweet prison. She knew his weaknesses and controlled the doctors and priests who acted according to her rules. She didn't need to persuade him, she ruled through his condition. Just imagine, a monarchy where the real orders come not from the king, but from a woman sitting in the next room. Can we even say that the king rules the country? Servants told stories. while Philip was immersed in his delusions, Elizabeth was negotiating with diplomats in the next room. Ministers signed treaties and orders that benefited her, not the king. She was not just the First Lady. She ruled the armies, finances, and diplomacy. They say that she was the one who decided which wars Spain would wage, whom it would support, and whom it would betray. Think about it, the most important decisions were made not in the throne room, but at the head of the bed. And the entire state depended on a person who did not even lift her head from the pillow. The Spanish whispered, "We don't have a king. We have a queen." Some called her a strong woman, others called her the silent executioner of Spain. But the fact remained, the empire that had belonged to Philip yesterday was now ruled by Elizabeth. The king lay under the covers, convinced of his own death. And his wife signed documents that determined the fate of millions. But even that was not enough for her. Because soon a new legend would emerge, about how Philip surrounded himself with the dead. It would seem that the absurdity had reached its limit, a king who could not get out of bed, a king who considered himself dead. But even here, the story did not end. Now imagine what rumors would spread today if the president demanded that dead bodies be brought to his bedroom to convince him that he was still alive. In later chronicles and court rumors, a gruesome legend appeared. Philip allegedly ordered the bodies of the dead to be brought to his bedroom so that he could compare himself to them and make sure he was still alive. There is no reliable evidence of this, and historians consider it more of a court fiction. But even the very appearance of such stories shows how strange and disturbing his behavior and condition seemed to his contemporaries. Imagine the picture painted by rumors, a dark bedroom, heavy silence, the king wrapped in blankets, with a possessed look in his eyes. And next to him, the figures of the dead, as if to confirm his words. "See. They are dead. And I am still alive." Whether this actually happened, we will never know. But it was this legend that spread at court, frightening and at the same time explaining what was already happening. The monarch, who considered himself dead, turned his own bedroom into a symbolic morgue. The people heard snippets of these rumors and whispered, "The king sleeps among the dead." The empire, which until recently had dictated the laws of the world, now looked like a mad theater, where the leading actor tested his vitality by comparing himself to the dead. At least that's what they said about him. How would you react if you heard such things about your ruler? It sounds like horror, but for the Spaniards of that time, it was almost everyday life. And while these terrible legends spread at court, Spain itself was becoming colder, weaker, closer to its own end. While the king lay in his symbolic morgue of pillows, the country declined along with him. 18th-century Spain still had vast possessions, stretching from the New World to Asia. But instead of developing trade and the army, it was sinking into chaos at court. Ministers pushed through their own decisions, and Queen Elizabeth appointed her favorites. The army was losing its strength. The once formidable fleet that conquered the oceans was now rotting in harbors. While England was building up its naval power, Spanish ships were waiting for the signature of a man who never got out of bed. The colonies in America were faltering. Instead of gold and silver, they were bringing more and more problems and less profit. One order, one delay. If the king's hand did not move, the border could move. And Europe looked at Madrid and asked, "What has the King of Spain decided?" And always heard the same answer. "He did not get out of bed today." 1746. In a dark bedroom of the Madrid palace, among the same blankets and pillows where he had spent most of his life, King Philip V finally died. His body, which he himself had considered dead for decades, was now truly cold. The doctors breathed a sigh of relief, as did the ministers. The state seemed to exhale. But this relief was bitter. The Spain he left behind had long since lost its former glory. He is not remembered as a reformer, a military leader, or a wise ruler. No. He is remembered as the king who never got out of bed. A man who ruled an empire from under a blanket. His contemporaries compared him to another tragic monarch of Europe, Charles VI of France, the glass king, who was afraid of breaking at the slightest touch. He was afraid of cracking. Philip was afraid of decay. Both became hostages to their own fears. And both led their states to disaster. Philip V lay there, convinced that he was dead and useless. And that is exactly what Spain became, powerless, weak, eaten away from within by its own corruption and decline. His life was an absurd theater. Musicians sang for the dead man, ministers slipped decrees under his blanket, and the entire empire waited for decisions from a man who had long lost touch with reality. And in the end, the metaphor became reality. The king, who feared decay, actually brought about the collapse of his own state. Back then, it was the king under the blanket. Today, it could be any ruler or leader who becomes a hostage to their own fears and illusions. The story of Philip V reminds us that when power cuts itself off from reality, it is not only the person who falls apart, but the whole country.